We've been in experiences like that before, where you've had wildly changing currents and espers spun around all night long.
This contour here is literally like that.
So in the morning you're not really sure where the chain is going to be and whether it may have got caught round a rock.
Fortunately, we have a couple of tricks up our sleeve. Are we weighing anchor then, Liz?
No, we are letting go of the mooring. Much easier than weighing anchor. I just got to drop this line, pull it back and off we go, hopefully.
And we're going up there.
Left Madana Bay, had a couple of days there, did a few jobs, sorted stuff out, you know, usual stuff, got nice full diesel tanks and everything, and off we go. So we are now heading along the islands, the southern islands of Indonesia. We're still in Lombok at the moment, but we're heading towards Komodo and Flores and all those islands around there over the next few months. Really looking forward to seeing this part of the world, because last time we came across from Sulawesi we saw all this, but we whizzed past it all, missed it all, because we were on a mission to get our visas sorted out and to go back to the UK. But now we are at our leisure, and our current visas are, we've got another 3 months. Yes, it's great. Yeah, I'm not fishing, by the way, because there's still crap in the water around here, so can't do any fishing at the moment. We'll see if that changes, but at the moment there's too much rubbish.
Pottering along here up the coast, doing a 5 knots, just motor sailing, and you can see what happens every day. It's just really the landmass heating up and creating its own little weather system. But it's all the way up this coast. And I was saying to Liz, I wonder how far offshore this cloud comes, or if it dissipates before it gets to us. But we've already heard thunder. And it's funny because you look over that way towards the north, and it's nice blue, clear skies. Tell us your thoughts then.
I was just looking to see if there's an alternative to staying here, since you're not very happy with the seabed.
This contour here is literally like that. So when we came into anchor, we got to 20 metres, I thought perfect, so we just nudged it forward and it dropped down to 15 within a second. So there's clearly a bank here. Meanwhile, we've got this squall coming across us, and then Liz is at the front, not knowing what's going on, so she comes back and goes me, 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 and I say to her, me, 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 me. Continue.
No, I'm just seeing how far it is to the next place, which is one that Totem put in. I don't have anything else to say. Just wait for this to go and then we can make our minds up. But I do want to have an alternative up my sleeve.
There is a very steep shelf, and although we dropped the anchor in 22 metres, by the time the boat had pulled up we were sitting in 35, 40 metres, and at one point it was showing 50 metres. We've come back round now, we're now sitting in 34 metres, so it just shows you that chain is literally doing that. But actually, as I look up the coast, I can see there's a little reef at the end of the promontory there, which could have been a good spot to anchor, because it's quite noisy here. Although it looks very rustic, scenic and countryside-like, that's the main road that goes around the island. But still, we're not expecting any terrible weather, so it's just those squalls we've got to keep an eye on. In this episode you're going to see us anchoring in 2 quite tricky situations, so we thought we'd examine them in more detail. The first one is the one you've just seen, which is us anchoring off relatively uncharted waters on the northwest coast of Lombok, and then the second one is going to be in some strong currents. We'll come on to that second one later, but first of all let's just have a look at this one, which was quite interesting because we didn't really have much chart data to go on.
This coastline is like much of Indonesia's coast. That is, it's steep right up until the shoreline, often making it impossible to drop the hook. However, along this particular section, the sea does shallow, and there's a strip of 30 to 40 metre depths that eventually level off to something potentially anchorable.
Now, as we mentioned in that earlier clip, there was a little charted reef area just up the coast, But we're contending with some winds that are coming off of Lombok, and it's creating some swell that wraps around the corner. So we wanted to tuck right in, and that's why we went for this particular anchorage. Now, a word of caution when it comes to using navionics in Indonesia, the data is not always correct. The other little tip that I can give you though is that if navionics is showing an area of anchorable depths, be it a whole strip of coastline or maybe a little patch in the corner of a bay, it does mean that more than likely there is somewhere that you could potentially anchor, but it's up to you to sniff it out. We should also quickly mention the sonar charts overlay in navionics. Now, from our experience, this is grossly inaccurate and should not be relied upon. This sonar data is collected by navionics users, but I'd be interested to know how many of those people recorded and uploaded their depth data in this particular bay. Just as an example, we've been in over 5 metre patches where the sonar overlay is showing 20 metres, so definitely use this feature with a lot of caution.
Let's look at this anchoring scenario. The depth contour is extremely steep, rising from 50 metres to 15 metres in a matter of seconds. You only have to look at the fishing boats parked on the steep shore to understand how the seabed pans out in this area. Under different circumstances, we may have skipped this anchorage altogether, but don't forget, as we saw with the squall, there's an offshore breeze blowing off the mountains. This works to our advantage, as it will help keep Esper away from that steep bank. As we approach the anchorage, we find a suitable depth to drop the hook, bearing in mind how quickly it gets shallow. If we get in too close, we're in danger of running aground, and if we anchor too deep, we'll end up having to pay out all the chain. We decide to lower the chain in 20 metres, because we'll be putting out 3 times scope minimum. Any closer and we could be in danger of hitting the bank.
Wherever you lay your anchor, of course, you must always consider not just your swinging room, but also the fact that you may have to motor forwards when you come to weigh anchor.
If the anchor is dug in deep, you may have to motor over the top and forwards in order to pull it out. So you need to allow yourself that extra room forwards of the anchor. After dropping 20 metres of chain, we start to back up. In this particular situation, we stayed perpendicular to the shore in order to maintain a constant depth and continue to pay the chain out for 70 metres.
Now, admittedly, this is not an ideal anchoring scenario, but we had one thing in our favour, and that was the prevailing winds. As you saw in the video, we had a squall, and even after that, the prevailing winds were coming offshore. That is, they were coming over the mountains and blowing Esper away from the bank. So we used this to our advantage, and this is definitely one thing that you do need to think about when you are anchoring. We definitely would not have anchored in this spot if it had been an onshore breeze. This fact alone kept us comfortable with our decision, and we ended up having a good night's sleep from the protection of any swell. This morning we are motoring around an area that you've seen before. This is now the part we're sort of, I suppose if you look on a clock, we're sort of, I suppose at 12:30 on the clock of Lombok, and we're approaching the anchorable part again, because for the last section we have been in close to 1,000 metres, and as we saw in that anchorage last night, it shows you how steep the coastline is around here, and we're in 1,000 metres. And even right up to the shore here, it's still 100 metres. But now we're starting to come round to the part where you've got muddy and sandy patches. So we're just going to tuck around the corner and find one of those muddy patches to anchor in. Here we are now chugging along the northeast corner of Lombok. And directly behind me is our last anchorage we stopped at before we got to Madana Bay. So we were eyeing this up as a potential stop-off before going across to Sumbawa, which is the next island to the east. However, Liz has been eyeing up a couple of little islands on the northeast coast of Lombok. And since they're only about 6-7 miles away, we figured we may go and check them out. I just wanted to see what the current was like. The current can be quite strong between these islands. We still seem to be doing 5.5 knots, so we're just going to keep going, poke our noses around the corner, and if necessary, take that anchorage first and spend a couple of days there. I was up very early this morning at 5:30 because I could hear this funny noise, and went to the front of the boat, and sure enough, the water was running so fast it was making noises on the snubber, and the currents here are pretty vicious. I would guess that at that point it was probably running close to 5 knots, and I got into a bit of a panic because I was thinking, well, look, there's Esper anchored there, and just behind us is a very narrow channel, and it's all reef all the way around. But it is a new moon, and at 5:30 this morning it was low water, so the tide was actually turning. We've been pointing north the entire time we've been at anchor, but when we dropped the hook it wasn't as bad, and sure enough, a couple of hours later, of course, that current has slowed down. But my main concern was that the anchor bit as soon as we dropped it in the water, and sure enough, the waters are clear enough where we can see the bottom in 14 metres, and it does look a little bit rocky down there. So yeah, it's just me stressing as usual about all the things that could go wrong rather than appreciating this rather beautiful island.
I think you're absolutely right to be concerned. I was too. We've been in experiences like that before, where you've had wildly changing currents and Esper's spun around all night long. So in the morning you're not really sure where the chain is going to be and whether it may have got caught round a rock or something. So it's always pretty worrying when you do that.
It is, and the worst case scenario is that the anchor or the chain wraps around a rock and you have to dive down to free it up. And of course, with really strong currents, that could potentially be a very dangerous situation, so you want to try and avoid that. Fortunately, we have a couple of tricks up our sleeve.
The currents here between Lombok and Sumbawa can run pretty strong. In fact, the currents along the whole island chain can be a real challenge. And despite what Jamie said to camera, they're not related to the state of the tide or even the moon.
Yeah, and in fact, from our experience, we've found that quite often the currents are strongest around mid-tide. But this isn't a rule of thumb to follow, unfortunately. I think at the time when I was recording to camera, I was under the illusion that these currents were constant and predictable, and they just aren't. If you remember back to our time in Sulawesi, there was one particular anchorage where we ended up pirouetting fully for 15 minutes because the currents were so strong, but it only lasted 15 minutes, and after that Esper ended up pointing back into the right position again. Yeah. So completely unpredictable.
Under normal circumstances, a boat will point into wind and sit downwind of the anchor, keeping the anchor dug in at the correct angle. However, there can be wind against tide situations. This is where the wind seemingly keeps the boat pointing in the right direction, but where the currents are stronger and end up pushing the boat forward of the anchor. This presents a couple of issues. The first is that this is pulling on the anchor in the wrong direction, potentially pulling it out of its dug-in position.
Though I have to say this hasn't ever happened to us, and if it has, then the anchor has just reset itself. But of course the other problem is that now the chain is running underneath the boat. So not only is this now rubbing on your hull, scraping away your lovely new anti-foul, but it's also putting quite a bit of strain on the boat and could make weighing anchor quite difficult. In fact, you may even have to back up the boat instead of going forwards when bringing in the chain. Now this is why it's a good idea to have an exit strategy when you've got strong currents. In this particular anchorage we're in right now, we are among islands which are creating a funneling effect. So the currents are really, really strong. But on top of that, these little channels that the currents are running through weren't really well charted. So we had no idea what kind of depths we were contending with, and we didn't know if we could actually take the boat through these channels. Yeah. Because what happens is when you're weighing anchor, once that anchor lifts up off the bottom, the boat is going to start moving with the current. So you need to be mindful of your exit strategies.
Before we return to this gorgeous part of the world, we do need to have a little look at the dangers and the workarounds when it comes to being on a rocky seabed. It wasn't until the next day that we realised just how many rocks were beneath Esper.
Yeah, and if you get your anchor or your chain wrapped around a rock and you start weighing the chain, what can happen is that it will snap taut, and if you're not careful, you end up putting a lot of strain on the windlass, potentially ripping it out of the deck. Now, in an ideal situation, if this were to happen, you could dive down into the water and actually go down and look to see how the chain is laying. Now, if you do this, just make sure you keep your engine in neutral at all times that you're in the water.
If it's the anchor that's stuck fast, then we find the best solution is to let out 10 to 20 metres of chain, secure the snubber on the chain once more, motor forwards and turn the wheel hard over so you spin the boat round 180 degrees. Once in this position, go into astern and put the strain on the snubber to release the anchor. Take the snubber off and bring the chain up. In theory, you have changed the angle at which the chain is pulling at the anchor, and this should break it free. If it's the chain that's wrapped around a rock or a reef, if the water is clear, then dive down on it or look over the side to see how the chain is lying. You want to motor the boat outside the perimeter of the rock, following the direction of the chain in which it was laid. Quite often the chain has wedged itself underneath a small overhang in the rock, so by motoring around the outside of it, you're effectively pulling the chain out in a sideways motion rather than straight up. In both scenarios, if it doesn't work first time, change the angle and give it another go.
We have used both these techniques a number of times, and with some patients they really do work. The only time we got really stuck was in our first summer of cruising off the coast of Turkey, when we managed to wrap our chain around a cut mooring buoy that was sitting 10 metres beneath the water's surface, and we ended up having to employ the services of an emergency dive team. But that's another story.
So we've come ashore on one of the islands of this little group that we found between Lombok and Sambaya. It's really pretty, really. I mean, it's just these are perfect little jewels with nothing on them. Nobody lives here. Last night a group camped on one of the islands opposite us, but it's extraordinary to find this little spot right here. Behind me, you might be able to see Esper, and behind Esper is the shoreline to Lombok, and there's quite a lot of industry there. It doesn't seem to matter. There's a low hum when you get certain wind. But other than that, it's just a little jewel, a little place that you could call paradise. I'll tell you what's lovely and what's really refreshing, and that's walking along a beach that isn't covered in plastic, crap and shit everywhere. Look at the water, it's almost clean. I mean, it's not completely clean, but anyway, it's a nice difference.
I'm on the north side of Bidara Island. How do I know the name of this island? Because on the north side are a whole bunch of locals. You can hear them in the background. They're all from Lombok, from South Lombok, and they've come here just for the night. And it turns out that they like spearfishing. So we're going to go and see what they have caught. Anyway, say hello.
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 Hello. Hello.
Okay, show me your ikan.
Okay. I'll show you. The fish that we get tonight.
Last night.
Last night. I'm
Last
sorry.
night, yeah. Wow.
Wow. We have squid.
Oh, you got chumi chumi.
Chumi.
Yeah. Yeah.
So funny. Is that like a snake?
Oh, okay. This one is very good. I like this one.
Did you taste it before, sir?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
You like seafood?
Yeah, I love seafood.
So
Yeah,
that's
chimi
why
chimi.
he go to sea. He want to seafood more.
Yes. Very good.
Yeah.
So you
Not
eat
bad.
eating today?
I think we just eat this morning and last night, so I think it's enough for bring home.
To take home to the
Take
family.
home. Yeah,
Yeah.
for our brother.
I want to see your spear gun.
This is a gun for
Spare fishing.
spear fishing in the sea. Because my English a little.
English is good.
Yeah,
But
a little.
did you make yourself? You made it?
No,
one.
Oh, you bought this?
Ah.
So we just saw that first spear gun, little baby spear gun, but now they're pulling out the big guns, literally the big guns. Have a look at these.
Wood, yeah. Wood. This is for nice spear fishing, and this is long for day spear fishing.
Do you have
So that's what the locals get up to at the weekend, except it's not the weekend, it's the middle of the week. But it was great to see that those little huts, we were told what they were called, those platforms that they sit on, and the covered huts, they said had been put together by just local people, and they are free to use for anyone, which is great, isn't it? As I said, if that was in the UK, I suppose the equivalent would be beach huts. You know how much those things are worth.
beautiful and clear? See the bottom.
Just a hop, skip and a jump, and we're on the other island to the one we've just been on. This is Gili Kondo. This is the one that they had people camping on, making a lot of noise last night. They sounded like they were having a lot of fun. And this even has a little warung as well, so hopefully you might be able to get some, if nothing else, a cup of coffee and maybe a nasi goreng.
Hi Jamis, okay, thank you. And Lombok, Gili Kondo.
Gili Kondo.
Yeah.
The warmest of welcomes. And look, I've got my own special homemade ginger tea.
Tea and
My
ginger.
favourite.